So today we're going to talk about biodiversity and conservation. So biodiversity, bio meaning life, diversity meaning different, is the different life that exists in a population. And remember, you want to have high biodiversity in order for a population or ecosystem to survive. We can look at biodiversity under 3 levels. The first would be genetic. So within a population, how many different genes exist, meaning how many different traits can show up. Species diversity is among kind of an ecosystem, how many different types and kinds of species live there. And then ecosystem diversity is in the whole ecosystem, the living and non-living, how many different things, how many different kind of variabilities exist. And again, the key is you want higher biodiversity. Higher diversity in each category is better survival for the ecosystem or the species. When some of that stuff starts to not go well, the biodiversity, you can get extinction and endangered species. So extinction is when a species has completely disappeared, there are no more. Endangered and threatened has to do with how many there are left. Endangered is a little bit worse than threatened. Globally, 12% of birds, 20% of mammals, and 32% of amphibians are threatened with extinction. Extinction is a natural thing. If certain animals don't go extinct, other animals can't live. So the best example there is dinosaurs. If dinosaurs didn't go extinct, humans don't evolve. The mammals at the time were very small, kind of think like rat-like animals. The only reason mammals were able to explode into what they are now is because the dinosaurs went extinct. So, extinction is one of those things where it's not always negative, but, you don't want things to go extinct for no reason. So here's showing you some extinct species. So these are species that were around in our lifetime that are no longer. The big one would be the white rhino. And again, we've talked about this a lot. White rhino still exists in captivity, but in the wild they are now extinct. And here's some examples of endangered species on the World Wildlife Fund list. Cheetahs, leopards, sea turtles, tigers, all kinds of tigers. This is an orangutan, gorillas, that's a blue whale. Endangered meaning their numbers are to the point where they're so low that we're worried they are going to go extinct. Actually, most of these creatures are going extinct because of habitat loss more than anything else. Threatened is a place above endangered, so their numbers are starting to get concerning. They're not quite at the endangered yet. So elephants, monkeys is a tuna, panda bears, elephants, and again, the reason why they're on this list is humans are trying to do things to try to limit and bring their numbers back up so they don't go even further down into the endangered category. So the major threats to biodiversity to these animals we just looked at are habitat loss, introduced species, overexploitation, and global change. So habitat loss is just what it sounds like. Humans kind of cutting down forests, encroaching onto land where these animals live, moving them back. Sometimes this results in these animals coming in contact with humans more often than they would. Introduced species is those invasive species. We talked about that last time. The idea that the invasive species come in and they kind of overpower the species that live there. Over-exploration or exploitation could be overfishing, overhunting, taking out animals that are important to an ecosystem, and then global change, including climate change. So remember, climate change is natural, but if it happens too quickly, animals may not be able to adapt and survive. So there are groups that are trying to conserve populations. They're working to help this problem. What they do is they look at what we call the minimum viable population. This is the lowest you can go in a population before they kind of go into what we call that extinction vortex. So this is how we knew the white rhino probably were going to go extinct before they did. Their numbers got so low that their minimum viable population was surpassed. They went too low. And what happens there is you have too much inbreeding, which causes even less genetic diversity, which causes even more problems, genetically, and then that species isn't going to be able to survive. There's 2 main approaches to try to fix this. One is the small population approach, and the other one's the declining population approach. And both of these, again, are focusing on trying to bring the population up. So not only just the number of creatures, but they also pay attention to the genetics. So when zoos try to do this, they move around the animals. They actually genetically look at the animals and see which ones are best to mate to increase the genetic diversity even more. They don't just mate them willy-nilly. And again, this is trying to get the numbers up for these animals. And this is the extinction vortex. So this is what happens kind of when that minimum viable population is surpassed. The population is very small, which leads to a lot of inbreeding and genetic drift, which leads to loss of genetic variability, which means the population is less fit and able to survive in the environment. So you have lower reproduction rates, higher mortality, which makes the population even smaller, and then we kind of go again. So it's called a population vortex. So when that minimum viable population is breached, when you go over that, pretty much the species is gonna go away. We don't have enough of the genetic diversity and the things that's just gonna keep kind of spiraling down until they are gone. One thing environmentalists look at is something called the keystone species. So this is not necessarily the highest predator. It's not necessarily a dominant species. It is the species that has the biggest effect on the community. And the reason why we want to pay attention to keystone species is if they go away, it can affect the entire ecosystem. So if we look at this example, the keystone species in this case is the shark, which is the top predator. And you can see with the keystone species, you have all this biodiversity, you have a lot of different animals there. If you lose the shark, you see immediately what happens. You can see right away we've lost a lot of animals. We don't have a lot of species diversity. The rays increase because they're not having that predator there, but then the rays are eating all this stuff too much and they're going to go away. So the keystone species is that species that is really, really important to keep a whole ecosystem going. If we can identify that keystone in ecosystems, we can work to kind of protect that animal. And usually if you protect that animal alone, you're going to protect the whole ecosystem. Another way that we're trying to combat this is landscape ecology. So again, people kind of going into animals' territories is kind of affecting where they're living. So one way that we can try to fix this is how we're going into these environments. So it's called land use planning and boundaries or edging. So in this picture, you see natural edging. This is a natural forest with lakes and stuff. So you have some open ground, but you kind of see how the forest kind of teeters off. It's not these very sharp edges. Think about an animal perspective. They can kind of hide all along this tree line. And this is usually what happens when humans create edges and boundaries. You get this big square space where they've cleared all this area. So there's no trees here. So there's no place to hide. There's no place to hide from the sun. So these very square edges, even though they're good for humans, they're bad for animals. So what we're trying to do now is when we do clear land for housing or whatever, we're keeping them more natural boundaries. We're keeping the trees and the plants there, only clearing enough land for just, the houses. Farming, it's a little bit more difficult to do this, but again, we're really trying to do more natural boundary planning than these big square spaces. This is showing you a movement corridor in Europe. So obviously we know here you build a road in the middle of a natural area and you're gonna have animals trying to run across the road. You can see here they built kind of this bridge that has natural grass. So the animals should be going over the bridge instead of running in the road. Another way we can really protect animals is identifying where you have what we call biodiversity hotspots and really, really protecting those areas. So you can see here, everything in red is a terrestrial biodiversity hotspot, and everything with the blue triangles are the marine. So if we have these spots, we know that there's a lot of animals that live here. There's a lot of biodiversity. We can work to really protect these areas. The trouble comes along with political issues. Some of these areas are things like the Amazon, where the people who live near the Amazon want to clear the trees to be able to farm or kind of build their own houses, and we're trying to say to them, you can't do that. Your area is really important to the world. A little bit of an issue, saying you do it, why can't we? But by identifying these hotspots, scientists are able to really pay attention and key into those areas and try to protect them and the species that live there. So here's some current ecological concerns. We're going to look at each one of these individually. So eutrophication, acid rain, biological magnification, ozone depletion, greenhouse effect, and global. So eutrophication is where you're going to get runoff from farms or factories that causes an influx of some of those nutrients you guys looked at the beginning of this unit. So this one's, you're showing a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus kind of going into the water, more so than that would naturally be there. And usually what eutrophication causes is what we call algal blooms. I'm sure you've heard of algal blooms, or these happen in Florida this summer. Algae's good in small amounts. When you get these blooms, it's bad. So when you get any huge influx of any animal, it's always bad. So algal blooms not only kind of block the sunlight, they suck up all the oxygen in an area, so it can kill some of the animals that live there. It can cause the animals that live there just to move out of the area. So it's kind of like a dead zone where you're going to get an algal bloom. So eutrophication, that runoff from farms and factories, we're kind of trying to keep those places from allowing their wastewater to run off into our bodies of water. They need to take steps to kind of get rid of it in a different way to prevent this from happening. So these are two algal blooms. There's a smaller one kind of in a lake. And then you can see here, this is off the coast. I'm not sure where this is, but this entire area is covered with algae, which you can see the issues with this. This is showing you acid rain across the U.S. So you can see that pH numbers here. Anything below about 4.6 is considered acidic. Now, not acid rain like on TVs. It's not going to burn you. You've experienced acid rain. You just had really no idea. It's not that acidic. You can see we get more acid rain on the East Coast because our weather moves west to east. So the clouds are kind of sucking up all the pollution across the states here, and then it dumps it on us on the eastern side. Europe is actually even worse on this side because it takes all of our pollution and dumps it over there. Acid rain is most harmful in smaller bodies of water. This is going to change the pH of like small ponds, and then it also affects trees and other structures outside. This is showing you effects of acid rain on a forest. It's kind of degrading the trees here, killing off the trees. And here's acid rain damage to statues in Europe. They have a lot of issues with this. Obviously, Europe has a lot more statues than we have, but you can see what happened in 60 years to this statue from the acid eroding. And the way to stop acid rain, again, that's more of a factory issue, a car issue. When the CO2 goes into the clouds, it creates the rain to be acidic. So the way to stop it or slow it down is to stop those pollution things from going into the air. So this is showing you biomagnification. This is why they say, you can't eat a lot of tuna or don't eat a lot of fish. When you're pregnant, you're not supposed to eat a lot of tuna or fish. Because what happens is, you can see the parts per million, which is the concentration. This is PCBs. This is also for something like mercury. And as you go up the food chain, you can see the parts per million of these poisons are getting higher. So the poisons get magnified the higher you go up the food chain. So if you look here, the phytoplankton is very low, then you have the zooplankton, then you have the fish, the trout's all the way at 4.8, and then the herring is 124. So it very much intensely magnifies as you go up the food chain. So this is the concentration of the ozone layer. So it was a big problem, and in the 80s they passed kind of legislation to help it. It went back up, and from now it's kind of been bouncing around. During COVID, the ozone layer repaired itself. You can see here the big hole. Okay, it's actually over Australia. The problem with losing the ozone layer is the ozone layer protects us from harmful UV rays. So not having that ozone layer means that those UV rays are kind of coming through more strongly than they would. So that is a big problem in Australia. Australians never go out without sunscreen or anything covering themselves, and can also increase the temperature of an area. So we did talk a bit already about greenhouse gases and global warming. Greenhouse gases basically trap too much of the sun's heat. They don't allow it to escape, which increases the surface temperature of the earth. And greenhouse gases are pollutants. It's things like CO2, methane, basically things that are made from factories and cars and things that pollute our atmosphere. And again, we've seen this graph, the correlation between CO2 level and global temperature. Be it what it will, there is some correlation there that you can see. And these are some results of global warming. Obviously, the poor little polar bears are dying because the sea level ice is melting. One of the easiest ways to combat it is, different power sources. If we get off fossil fuels, that's going to decrease a lot the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. And again, we talked about global climate change. Is it natural? Yes. Is it happening quicker than it should? Maybe. The results could be, that the whole world isn't going to die, but there could be some major changes to our lifestyle. So stronger natural storms, some crops, drought, famine happening, and then major weather changes or sea level rise are already occurring and probably going to continue. This is showing you kind of sea level rise in different areas. Notice it's in inches, so we're not talking about an 8-foot tidal wave. The biggest is 8 inches of water. We're not talking about, again, like an entire city being underwater. We're just talking about there being standing water where there used to be land. And then that land obviously can't be used to live in or to make crops. So where is all that going to go? This is kind of where we could see a change in snowfall. You see us probably would have less snowfall. So however you feel about snow, again, that's a long-term climate shift. And kind of the big thing is if the ocean temperatures change, the animals that live there are going to change. So you can see where normally it's colder and warmer, and those animals that used to live in a warm climate, if it gets cold, or they live in a cold climate and it gets warm, they're going to have to adapt or they're going to become extinct. So what is going to happen to our ocean ecosystem, and then what's the kind of, the effect of that as it rolls through. This is showing you a picture of Arctic sea ice melt. It's even worse now. So this is from September 2013. What you're looking at here is mainly like this area. You might be like, oh, that's still there. Well, it is. But this area here, it's sparse. It's getting way worse. If you look at a picture, the sea ice is melting at a rapid rate. Again, it's not going to kill us all, but it's going to have significant changes on our climate and animals that live here. So what can we do? One of the things is called restoration ecology. So it's things like bioremediation and bioimitation, where we're basically going to kind of try to get rid of the harmfulness and give nature back to nature. So bioremediation is where you're going to use microorganisms to try to get rid of pollutants in the water. You kind of put microorganisms and pollutants, they kind of like almost fix or take out the pollutants themselves. So this is showing you one example of this fix. This is in 1991. This is a mining area before restoration. And here's that same exact area after the restoration. So basically we put in these microorganisms and we just left it alone and let nature take care of it. And nature will heal itself if we let it do it. Again, this is showing you waste pits with uranium before. When you add ethanol to uranium, it gets rid of it. You can see the concentration of uranium going down. And then as this continued happens, those wastewater pits became, livable and they kind of healed themselves. So again, here's ways we can use microorganisms to kind of refresh soil, microorganisms to kind of eat up or get rid of pollutants. And what will happen is if you leave an area to itself to heal, succession will occur. So either primary succession or secondary. You can see the main differences where you start. So primary succession starts with plain just rocks and moss, where secondary is going to start with some grasses. You can see the endpoint's kind of similar. You're going to end up with big trees. So for primary succession, you start with rocks. The rocks get moss. You then get small grasses, small shrubs, small trees, and eventually big trees. Secondary just happens a little quicker because you're starting with the grasses, but the same kind of idea. And any area pretty much will do this as long as you let nature heal.